Well, here we go, everybody. Hello and welcome to The View from the Lane, the Tottenham Hotspur podcast from The Athletic. I'm Danny Kelly, and joining me today are the Athletics Charlie Eccleshare and James Moore. Listen, I don't want the podcast to become like Arsenal Fan TV, where every time Spurs lose a game of consequence, there is a massive meltdown. But I'm going to make an exception in this case. I had a massive meltdown after the first leg of the Carabao Cup semi-final. And I'm
going to have one now.
James is going to have one now. Look, before you do, James, I'll give you one more chance to paw the ground in anticipation while we get the reasonable point of view from the match reporter for The Athletic. Charlie, what did you make of last night's events at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium?
I feel like I'm very much in the lamb to the slaughter role here of, say something so you could be slapped down. Well, last week I
nothing personal. Don't take it personally. This is about the club.
No, absolutely. I'm happy to do this service. Last week I talked to you. I sort of went through all the decisions that you were really angry with and offered the counterpoint. I don't think there is a defence as such for not playing Hugo Lloris and playing Galini. I mean, anyone who's watched Galini since he's come to Spurs, including and probably most pertinently on Sunday against Morecambe, where he looked so shaky and short of confidence. It was not a decision where, when Galini then gaffed for the goal, it was like, who could have seen that coming? That's just unlucky on Conte. Everyone who's watched Galini knows he's not up to much. So yeah, that was a baffling decision. I asked Conte about it after. He'd already been asked, and I followed up and said, do you understand the frustration of the fans? Because clearly fans were really, really angry and annoyed about it. So I think that was a really bad call. I think I would have played Sessegnon over Doherty as well. You could make a case for Ronnie Skip. Of course you could, because he's been really good. Do I think those would have changed the outcome of the tie? Probably not. But yes, they would have given Spurs a much better chance.
Okay.
That's kind of how I see it.
All right. And we'll talk about Conte's response.
And they needed every chance they had, because over the two legs they were battered, quite frankly.
Well, it's arguable. And one more, James. You're coming now to the front of the queue. You notice when you're queuing for tickets, your little man has moved 2 more spaces to the right. You could argue that without Lloris, Dyer, Romero, Skip, Son, and last night I worked out a 6th. I mean, some people would say them. Yeah, and Reguilon. They're
missing half the team, and they're not good enough against Chelsea to absorb that.
They're over half the team.
All the more reasons I'm coming.
James Moore. The floor is yours. I hope you heard my rant last week. Don't let there be a benchmark. Go way beyond that.
You say that, Charlie. That's all the more reason to play as strong a possible team as you can with like 3 or 4 players missing for injury. You have to play your first choice goalkeeper. It's a big game against the champions of Europe. You're 2-0 down from the first leg. It's not an insurmountable deficit. It's not like they're 3-0 down, 4-0 down, and you should just bin it off. If you're going to bin it off at 2-0, then, what does that say about you as a manager? You've got to play your full-strength team. There aren't many players who have won trophies, as we keep hearing, at the club. You've got a World Cup winning goalkeeper and the captain on the bench in a game against the European champions. We are 2-0 down. It's absolutely laughable that you play that. And you're right, Charlie. It was no surprise to see Galini chuck one in the first 20 minutes of the game. I mean, it was the most predictable thing I've ever seen. It's like, and I'm sure I've done this bit before, like the first 5 minutes of an episode of Casualty where, like a bloke walks into a barn and starts climbing over a ladder over the top of a combine harvester, and lo and behold, he falls down and impales himself on the thing. And that is a genuine episode of Casualty that I saw as a child. It scarred me for weeks. Not literally.
It's turned you right against combine harvesters,
completely against all agricultural stuff now. I cannot fathom that decision. I mean, you mentioned Skip and Sessegnon as well, and I think it's fairly well documented now. Anyone who's watched Spurs regularly this season will have seen that Spurs are a much better team, much more solid team, and much better with the ball with Skip in the team. And given Royale can't attack at all, he won't go around the outside of the fullback. He won't cross the ball into the box at a sensible moment. If you then have Matt Doherty on the left, you can't attack through the left, down the left or down the right. It's all going to have to come through the middle. You're going to become incredibly easy, even easier to defend against. I just can't fathom. I mean, I don't know whether Sessegnon is still only half fit. I have no idea. Or whether Conte doesn't trust him to play against a team of that standing. I don't know. He hasn't said.
Even though he was actually really good against Liverpool, against Trent.
Well, there you go. But I kind of think the three. I mean, maybe this is being wise after the event, but I really, really don't think it is. And you saw the messages that I sent in that WhatsApp group before the game. If those three players play, who knows what happens? And I'm not saying that if those three players play, Spurs definitely win the game, let alone win 3-0 that they would have needed to win by 2-0 in 90 minutes and then see what happens in extra time. But it would move the dial enough, I think, for there to be some semblance of belief. If Spurs don't concede that stupid goal in 20 minutes, Chelsea perhaps are starting to sweat a little bit as the game wears on. Spurs then get the game is completely different from that point onwards. Obviously, if Spurs then get a fluky goal or one of those marginal decisions that were all right, but if the play goes slightly differently and then it actually is a onside goal or actually is a penalty, and then suddenly it's 2-1 and then the game is completely different.
Let me ask a question. I've got an observation about this, but let me ask you a question about this. Either of you can answer this. Why afterwards? I presume the gentlemen and gentle ladies of the press asked him why he left out their captain. And from what I've read, the little I've read online this morning, he didn't really have an answer.
I don't think he could possibly have realised how badly it was just going to go down. Like, I just don't think you make decisions like that if you realise that, like, I mean, some of the stuff that has been said about him during the first half of that game, by the way, I mean, not complimentary in the stands.
But I don't think he gives a shit. Why would he? I mean, like, you don't get to where you are as Antonio Conte. The reason he's where he is and most is because you don't care about what people who are less informed than you think, and that is the reality.
If he does badly in this job, he didn't get the Manchester United job right. The Manchester United job was effective. He was out of a job. The Manchester United job was effectively available because that clown Solskjaer in charge for the first 4 months of the season. The Manchester United job was effectively available. Everyone knew that they were going to sack him eventually, and that was going to come up, right? If Manchester United had wanted him as manager, he would have got that job. Well, has there never been another job? I mean, Barcelona, that came up the season. Was that before or after he came to Spurs? Was it after or before? After. I mean, again, sorry. Similar thing though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. We all knew Koeman was going to get binned at some point in the first half of the season. It was just a matter of time, and this guy was sat there waiting for a job. He's ended up at Tottenham, right? There's a reason he's ended up at Tottenham. It's not because he wants to go to Chit King and have a look around the stadium and do the skywalk or whatever else, right? It's because all these other clubs decided that he wasn't the manager for them, right? Manchester United decided he wasn't the manager for them. He is at Tottenham. He needs to prove now that he is an elite manager. And I would agree with what Danny said. He is one of the top, the number you said, sort of 7 or 8. I'd probably make that number even smaller, actually, for the that he's in. But he actually has to prove that now with Spurs. But it's all very well and good going to Chelsea and winning the Premier League where you've got a bottomless pit of money at Juventus and then at Inter, and then, by the way, throwing a strop at Inter when you realised you weren't going to have a bottomless pit of money anymore. Like, if you're coming to manage a top like Spurs, it's a completely different thing. You can't have a sulk and chuck an inferior goalkeeper into the team to make a political point in a big game. I'm sorry, you cannot do that.
But that's a separate point. The initial question was surely he knew how badly this was going to go down with the fans. And I'm saying I don't think that would have been his primary concern. Of course he needs to win games, but he's not going to be thinking, I can't do this because the fans are going to hammer me. He doesn't give a shit. And rightly or wrongly, and you might say...
But the reaction of fans will always move the dial, right? Look, you know as well as I do, but if the second the fans turn, then the players, that they do start to just... They might be behind, but they will start to turn in the same direction as well. You see it endless, countless times we've seen that. The second the fans turn on a manager. Honestly, I wouldn't be at all surprised if that happens.
Yeah, I mean, but if they get good results in the next 3 games, which they might well do...
He's going to need to get a good result on Sunday now.
Honestly,
he is under massive pressure to get a result on Sunday.
It's okay. He saved Ryan Sessegnon for Sunday. Don't worry about that. Right. All right. I open this by saying I don't want it to be like Arsenal fan TV, but
he's got to go. He's got to go.
Well, the people who listen deserve honesty. And so I'll just there was a moment, and of course the defeat was raw. I was still mulling over the 3 VARs, all of which were technically correct. No, sorry, that sounded like a blinking prime minister. All of which were correct. And a thought went through my head, Charlie and James, just watching the press conference, his comments one-to-one, not the big press conference afterwards. And a part of me said, I don't want to be apocalyptic. You won't be here by May, will you? Is that completely insane?
No, I sent a WhatsApp message along the same lines during the first half of the game.
Charlie, you're looking at the pair of us as though we're
No,
I would say it wouldn't be a surprise if, rather than definitive statement.
No, we're not answering a definitive statement.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't be stunned if that happened. And last week when he was giving his press conference, there were a lot of murmurings of like, this feels awfully like Conte in the 2017-18 meltdown season at Chelsea. I think he will be. I think what's so weird about all of this is that not sound all Theresa May after the 2017 election, but in the Premier League sense.
You always say that.
Yeah. I know. I'm always channeling my inner May. Nothing's actually changed.
Where's your big necklace?
Nothing's changed in the Premier League. I mean, like a week or so ago, we were saying, they are fourth is very much in their own hands. They're in a really good position. They can go a long way clear, actually, of West Ham, United, and Chelsea, and Arsenal. If they win those games, they play Arsenal. If they beat them, and Arsenal, in a pretty ropey state now with injuries and unavailabilities, they beat them. They're a point ahead of them with 2 games in hand. They haven't played any league games since then. They've all that's happened is they've lost 3-0 on aggregate to a team that are the champions of Europe and are far, far better than them. Their bench last night would have walked into the Spurs team mainly. That's all that's happened. And I know it's so shit losing, getting just like swatted away by a team that should be a rival, but Chelsea aren't a rival right now. That is the painful reality. But the teams that actually are rivals of them are similarly limited as Spurs. They're similarly not very good in a grander sense. And Spurs can have what would have been a dream season at the start of the season, and certainly when Nuno was sacked in October. If they beat teams at their level, games against Chelsea aren't going to define their season. They can get battered at the Etihad, battered at Anfield, which on the evidence of last night is quite likely to happen. And it won't actually make that much of a difference. And that's painful because a few years ago, Spurs were beating teams like Chelsea, but they're just not at their level right now. And these 2 games don't really change that. So I think if you think Conte is the man, and let's not forget a week or so ago, we couldn't get enough of Antonio Conte. I don't think losing these 2 games, 3-0 on aggregate, really changed all that much.